All right. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. I have a class, an in-person class before this, and I'm always rushing to get over here into my office in time to teach. What we have on the agenda for today is to briefly finish. No, Casey, I feel like that myself, actually. This is very bright here. If I move over here, yeah. All right. Yeah, what's on the agenda for today? Well, I want to finish the slides uh, from Monday. So we had a little bit left there when it came to Kripke, and then we'll move on to today's topic, which is what knowledge is in the first place. Let's get the old screen share going. And let's see. We had just finished talking about Quine. Um, we're moving on to talk about Kripke. Last time, I guess the theme of the chapter was on the difference between the rationalist and empiricist traditions. And where they really differ is how a priori knowledge is regarded. A priori knowledge being knowledge that comes independently of sense experience. Um, Rationalists tend to say that this is the ultimate source of knowledge, where empiricists say that knowledge fundamentally comes from the senses, and we can do some a priori reasoning, and anything about language or the necessary connections between concepts. That's fine. In fact, David Hume thinks that that's really the only kind of a priori knowledge that we can have. And that's where the empiricists differ. Then along comes Kant, who identifies a synthetic a priori statement, like the example was all events have a cause. So this way, he kind of saves causality from David Hume's skepticism by making it a part of the way that the mind structures our experience of the world. Then we moved on to talk about Quine and the first dogma of empiricism. If you recall, the first dogma is about the analytic synthetic distinction. Um, Quine argued that we don't really understand what analytic statements are. I mean, analytic statements are statements that contain synonymy. So, all triangles have three sides. Being a triangle and being a three-sided polygon are synonymous one another. And those are the necessarily true statements, and statements that are necessarily true statements are the analytic statements. So we have a circle. And since there's a circle there, that means Quine argues that we don't really understand analytic propositions. And if we don't understand those, then we do not understand synthetic propositions. Um, so there's Quine's one of Quine's contributions. We didn't quite have time to get to Kripke, so that's where we'll pick up from now. So let's go full screen. All right, so Kripke is a very interesting guy. So a synthetic proposition is a kind of proposition where the predicate concept is not contained within the subject concept. So my example from last time was the pants are purple. There's nothing about the concept of pants that means it's necessary for the pants to be purple in color. If you want to know if the pants are purple, you have to go and observe what color the pants are. So that's a synthetic proposition, and it's different from analytic propositions because they do contain the predicate concept in the subject concept. So the subject concept triangle contains the predicate concept three-sided polygon. So Kripke, very interesting and somewhat of a controversial figure. Now, rationalists and empiricists both agree that if we can know something a priori, that whatever we can know a priori is necessarily true. Things that we know a posteriori are not necessarily true because it could have been otherwise. But Saul Kripke, in a series of lectures entitled Naming and Necessity, argued that some a posteriori knowledge is also necessarily true. And the kind of thing Kripke had in mind here were identity statements. So water is H2O is an identity statement. It's necessarily true. If you have water, it's necessarily true that you also have H2O. Now, granted, for a long time, we didn't know that water was H2O. We used to think, way back in Aristotle's day, for example, that water is a fundamental element. But of course, now we know that water is made out of two proper elements, two chemical elements, hydrogen and oxygen. So this is a posteriori knowledge. We had to go out and look and see what water is actually made of. But now that we have identified water as H2O, it's necessarily true that if we find some water, we've got some H2O. And we come to know facts like this through our experience. So that's an example like, like water is H2O is a necessary a posteriori proposition. So for a long time, over 2,000 years, arguably, philosophers had assumed that the connection, that there was this connection between necessity and a priori knowledge. And there is one, but it's not the entire picture. What Kripke showed was that some a posteriori knowledge is also necessarily true. If you found water, it's got to be H2O. If it's not H2O, it's not water, right? So that's how that works. So we've covered a priori knowledge and a posteriori knowledge specifically, but generally speaking, what exactly is knowledge? That is where we will turn next. So we need to get out of our full screen here and we'll go to the other set of slides. So today we're going to talk about just what exactly knowledge is. And we'll look at something called the traditional analysis of knowledge and what might be wrong with it. So let's begin with the traditional analysis of knowledge. So in a very old dialogue written by Plato entitled the Meno, the character Socrates tells Meno that true beliefs may be just as useful as knowledge, but knowledge is more secure. This is a very interesting dialogue because Meno and Socrates actually start out talking about what virtue is. Meno wants to know if virtue is what it is and whether it's teachable. Virtue means like excellence in this context. So Meno wants to know if it's teachable and if it's teachable, if it's something that we can know, and the conversation turns to a conversation about knowledge and true belief. And Socrates likens true beliefs to the images of Daedalus. These were supposed to be statues that were created by the legendary craftsman Daedalus. that were so lifelike that if you didn't fasten them down, they would get up and walk away from you. That's how lifelike these statues were. Socrates likens true beliefs to these images. He says, true opinions, beliefs, are a fine thing and do all sorts of good so long as they stay in their place, but they will not stay long. They run away from a man's mind, so they are not worth much until you tether them by working out the reason. So a true belief is like one of these statues. It'll run away unless you fasten it down. True beliefs will not stay with you long unless fastened down by a reason. Um, maybe you have a true belief that, for example, what can we? Well, let's come up with an example. Well, I think the one that Crumley uses is of somebody who has a true belief about what the right answer to a question is on the test, but she doesn't study. She just kind of has this hunch, like, oh, I know, I think I know the answer, and she's correct. But then she talks to her friend who has studied, and he says, no, actually, this is the correct answer. It's B, not A. So she changes her answer to B. Now, A was the right answer. So she had a true belief. But because it wasn't fastened down by a reason, it ran away out of the soul, like an image of Daedalus will run away and play truant if not fastened down. Now, a lot of people consider this to be the very first expression of what we're calling the traditional analysis of knowledge. And that is, on that analysis, knowledge is a special kind of belief. It is a justified, true belief. So recall, if you will, what beliefs are. Beliefs are mental representations of the world. And by the world, I mean everything. The world is everything, not just the planet Earth. So if you have a belief A about some aspect of the world, um, and your belief is true, then that's because A is true or A is the case. So a true belief is a mental representation which is meant to represent the world the way it really is, right? Like I believe there is a cup of coffee on my desk. Well, it's in my hand right now, but now it's back on my desk. So if it is the case that there is a cup of coffee on my desk, then my belief is true. Likewise, if I believe that it's raining in Ottawa, my belief is true, just in case that it really is raining in Ottawa. Incidentally, I do not believe that it is raining in Ottawa right now. I believe that it is sunny. My evidence for this belief is my sense experience. I'm looking out the window and I can see the sun shining, so I form the belief that it is sunny in Ottawa, and my belief is true because it is in fact sunny. Not a cup, eh? I don't know. It looks cup-like to me. It looks like it's participating in the form of the cup, as Plato might say. Transcendental idealism. Well, it's hard to illustrate with an example. Um, but going back to transcendental idealism, the whole idea is that the mind structures what comes into it via the senses, using forms of sensible intuition and pure categories of understanding. So forms of sensible intuition are space and time. Categories of understanding are things like quantity, quality, and so on. You don't have to worry too much about the details of this because this all comes from Kant's first critique, which is a very, very difficult read. You could spend a whole class on that, right? Like not like one class, I mean a whole course on Kant's critiques. But what Kant was saying is that cause and effect, unlike what Hume says, cause and effect is not necessary. It's just this constant conjunction we see, and we have no reason to suspect that the future will be like the past. And, we can't rely on the uniformity principle because there's nothing necessary about cause and effect. It's all just a constant conjunction. Kant says, well, cause and effect are kind of like the way the mind structures experience. Um, so that's what the Copernican revolution in metaphysics was all about, right? Copernicus couldn't make his model of the solar system work with the Earth at the center and having the stars and planets revolve around Earth. So instead, he put the sun in the center and made himself revolve. Similarly, cause and effect for Kant aren't really out there in the world. Um, they're rather the way that our mind makes sense of the world and the things that happen in it. Does that help? Hopefully, it's not more confusing what I've just said. Okay, perfect. So, oh, one thing to note, the example I gave about believing it is raining or believing it is sunny, this is a realist view. Realism in philosophy means that you believe the world exists independently of whether there's a mind there to perceive it. So this office continues to exist even if there's no one in it, right? That's the realist view. So if I believe that it's raining in Ottawa, I believe that it is raining, but a more fundamental belief at play there is that I believe there is a world out there that it sometimes rains in the first place, right? I'm not in the matrix or anything, right? Um, Now, if I have good evidence for my belief, then I have a well justified true belief. And if I have that, according to the received view, then what I have is knowledge. So we can schematize it this way. On the traditional analysis, one has knowledge if and only if. That's what this means. Remember, IFF, if and only if I have a belief in A is true. So it's the case that the world is like A, perhaps that it's raining or that it's sunny. And I'm justified in believing A, which means I have some kind of evidence or um, some good reasons for believing A. So, on this analysis, a justified true belief is necessary and sufficient for knowledge. So, anything that's knowledge has to be a justified true belief. That's what the necessity claim means. And if I have a justified true belief, that is sufficient. That counts as knowing. But we're talking about a specific kind of knowledge here. It's important to note. We're talking about propositional knowledge, knowing that, if you like. So here are some examples of propositional knowledge. I know that Ottawa is a city in Canada. I know that triangles have three sides. I know that pizza is an Italian American food, right? These are all examples of propositional knowledge. This is different from what we might call procedural knowledge or knowing how. So I know how to get to Ottawa if I use Google Maps. I know how to draw a triangle. I know how to make a really tasty pizza. This is procedural knowledge. This is knowing how. The traditional analysis of knowledge or the justified true belief account is about propositional knowledge. It's not about procedural knowledge. But if we take Plato as being the first person to introduce the traditional analysis, the idea that knowledge is a justified true belief, which is better than a true belief because it's justified. It's fastened down by a reason. Stood for over 2,000 years until 1963 when it was challenged by somebody named Edmund Gettier. Here's a picture of Dr. Gettier right here. Now, he published a paper that was entitled, Is Justified True Belief Knowledge? And in that paper, Gettier offers these counterexamples They're counterexamples to the traditional analysis because they all describe cases where the subject has a true belief, but arguably not knowledge. And we call these examples today Gettier cases. And what his aim was to show that if you have a justified true belief, that is not sufficient for knowledge. An example that occurs in Gettier's paper, and my personal favorite example, is of reckoning time using a broken clock, right? So, say you walk into the room and the clock reads 5 p.m., and it just so happens to be 5 p.m. But you just happen to walk into that room at 5 p.m. and you don't know that the clock is broken. So you have a justification for your belief that it's 5 p.m., namely the clock reads 5 p.m. And your belief is true because it really is 5 p.m. But we wouldn't say that the person knows it's 5 p.m. because the clock is broken. Had they walked in the room at any other time other than 5 p.m., they would not have formed a true belief. So that is the number one example. Let's go on to the next slide. So another example from Lehrer, I think I'm pronouncing that right, is the no-got Ford case. So our subject S has good reasons to believe that her coworker, Miss No-got, owns a Ford. After all, S has seen Miss No-got driving a Ford, and S has heard reliable testimony that Miss No-got owns a Ford. So S has some justification for believing that No-got owns a Ford, and she forms the further belief that someone in the office owns a Ford. So Miss No-got and our subject S are all co-workers at the same office. But it turns out that Miss No-got actually doesn't own a Ford. Maybe she was just driving a rental car. That's the car we saw Miss No-got driving. Maybe S believes she's seen Miss No-got driving a Ford, but it was actually a Chevy, right? Maybe the testimony that S received that No-got owns a Ford is mistaken. So it's from a reliable person, but that person is mistaken. So S forms the belief that someone in the office owns a Ford, but Miss No-got is not the owner of the Ford. It's Miss Havett that owns the Ford. So S does, in this case, have a justified true belief in P, namely someone in the office owns a Ford. But is P an instance of knowledge? Somebody like Gettier would say no, it's not. S doesn't have knowledge because her reasons for the belief in P, someone in the office owns a Ford, aren't connected to the truth in the appropriate way. So, what does everybody think? Is everybody following this example so far, or the broken clock example for that matter? Very good. So we'll see that this whole idea, yeah, yeah, it's a good pun. The barn example is interesting too. Yeah, this example is a little bit different than the clock one because, I mean, the clock one I think is pretty straightforward because you straightforwardly form a belief about what time it is by looking at the clock. But in this one, you go from a specific belief to you go from Miss No-got owns a Ford to someone in the office knows a Ford or owns a Ford. So your reason for forming the more general belief in P, someone in the office owns a Ford, is resting on a sort of false assumption that Miss No-got is the one who owns the Ford. Um, yeah, like an assumption can be fine if it's a reasonable assumption, if the assumption is true. But in the No-got Ford case, the assumption that Miss Havett owns a Ford is incorrect, right? And that's why I think that example can be a little bit funny because it's like, well, what do you mean she S forms the belief that someone in the office owns a Ford because she believes that Miss Nogot owns a Ford. Why not stop at just believing Miss Nogot owns a Ford? But it's true that if you believe that Miss Nogot owns a Ford and Miss Nogot works in the office, then you believe that someone in the office owns a Ford, right? Can this apply to conspiracy theories? In what way? Can you clarify that question? Like, in what way would can you see this applying to conspiracy theories? Is it something to do, perhaps, about um, holding, like, conspiracy theorists holding false beliefs? Oh, yes. Well, the Earth is flat would not be a justified true belief, right? A flat earther, for example, would believe that their belief is true, but their belief that the Earth is flat, as well as their belief that, let me clarify, their belief that their belief that the Earth is flat is true, and their belief that the Earth is flat are both false. And I would say that, so that's not knowledge at all, right? But you can analyze the claims of conspiracy theorists um, using epistemology, right? Um, yeah, exactly. Justification is about having reasons or evidence that what you believe represents the world the way it is. Yeah, yeah. So that might be a justified belief, but if you're actually drinking coffee, then it's a false belief. And yes, yeah, Kalen, yeah, absolutely. There's no reason to believe the Earth is flat. Um, the Earth is a sphere, of course, but flat earthers will point to poor justifications for false beliefs. This is something that's characteristic of conspiracy theories, by the way, and that's because of the way conspiracy theories work. Conspiracy theories are almost like backwards science. You know, in science, you go out and you observe, you gather evidence, and you formulate a hypothesis about how the world is, and you test that. Conspiracy theorists sort of start with the conclusion and work their way backwards, as opposed to a science who gathers evidence and works their way to a conclusion. Conspiracy theorists do it the other way around. And that's why they're liable to be so mistaken about so many things. Um, how is the Ford example a true belief? Well, it's true that the belief P, someone in the office owns a Ford, is true. But the justification for it is the prior belief that Miss Nogot owns a Ford. But Miss Nogot doesn't own a Ford. Miss Havitt owns the Ford. So the belief is true. Someone in the office owns a Ford is true. But S's reasons for believing that are not good because S believes Miss Nogot owns the Ford when really it's Miss Havitt that owns the Ford. Yeah, it's because she's seen Miss Nogot driving a Ford, but maybe Miss Nogot was renting a car. Maybe Miss Nogot was borrowing Miss Havitt's car. Maybe Miss Havitt was tired and Miss Nogot gave her a lift home, right? Yeah, if it was true that Miss Nogot did own a Ford, then it would have been a well justified true belief. That's right. The key thing is what I say right here down at the bottom, right? To have knowledge, what you really need is for your reasons for your belief to connect to the truth in the correct way. Now, it's true that someone in the office owns a Ford, but S's reasons for believing that don't connect up to the truth in the proper way. And that's what Gettier cases illustrate. The problem that they illustrate with the traditional analysis. Here's the barn facade example. Um, this is from Alvin Goldman. So there's a film crew that has set up a bunch of barn facades along a rural road. And of course, there are some real barns along that road as well. And one day, a father is taking his son on a drive, and they're passing the barns and combines and tractors and cows. And the father is saying, "Look, son, that's a cow. Look, son, that's a tractor." You ever go on a drive with your parents when you were a kid? I used to. I used to love driving in the car. I wasn't driving when I was a kid, but I'd be there and I'd look out the window and it was hypnotic, you know? Something about the passing scenery and the motion of the car. I think that's why to this day I really like taking trains. I just love a good train ride because you can just like sit there and yeah, it's wonderful. So it takes me back to when I was a kid and um oh look, there's a cow. There's a thing, right? His father points to a real barn and says, "That's a barn." Now, does the father know that it's a barn? Goldman would say maybe we should be a little bit hesitant to say that the father knows that's a barn because he could have just as easily have pointed to the barn facade on the other side of the road and said, "That's a barn." But it's not a barn, it's a barn facade set up by this film crew that's filming a movie. I mean, sure, he has a justified true belief um, if he is pointing to the real barn, but he could have very easily pointed to the facade. And in that case, he would have had a false belief. Yeah, therapeutic. There's something therapeutic about a good car ride or a train or not like airplanes. Airplanes are kind of boring. I mean, airplanes themselves are cool, but being in one I find is a little boring. But a train, man, I will take the train any day. Love the train. So there are some other examples of Gettier cases in the text, but we can move on from here. Um, we don't have as many slides today, so I think we can wrap up. We might wrap up this chapter a little early. Don't quote me on that, but maybe we will. All right. So, according to Crumley, he says on page 50, the traditional analysis leaves open the possibility that a person's reasons or justification might not be appropriately connected to what it is that makes the belief true. So maybe the traditional analysis is too weak. It doesn't quote me on that. What? Oh, on ending early or on how awesome trains are? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, how many slides do we have? Let me see. It's probably, because I went too hard on the slides for Monday. I tried to fit too much in. Oh yeah, we're over the halfway point already. I tried to fit too much in on Monday, is what happened, I think. Um, gotta go train. Yeah, seven. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, 7 out of 12 or 7 out of 13. So we're well underway here. Um, what it is that Gettier cases, I think, yeah, exactly. I can stick around and I can answer any questions that anyone has. Absolutely. So, what do these Gettier cases really imply? Well, they seem to imply that where you might have a justified true belief, if things had just been a teeny little bit different, you would have ended up with a false belief instead. For example, if the father had pointed to the facade on the left side of the road instead of the barn on the right side of the road, and said that's a barn, he would have had a false belief. So would his son have had a false belief. So, it's almost like in Gettier cases, if we have a true belief, if we say that we have knowledge, well, our knowledge is a matter of luck, and knowledge shouldn't be achieved by luck, right? We want certainty. That's what knowledge should be, is something that we're certain of. So maybe what Gettier cases do is they expose defective justifications for our beliefs. There's some information out there in the world that we're not aware of that could defeat our justification for our true belief. In the Ford Nogot case, the true belief is that someone in the office owns a Ford, but the fact that would have served as what we call a defeater here is that it's not Miss Nogot that owns the Ford; it's actually Miss Havitt that owns the Ford. If you became aware of that fact, we can call it a Gettier fact, then you might change your beliefs, right? If the father was aware that, on one side of the road it was all barn facades, um, he might change his beliefs accordingly. So we call these defeaters. Propositions that express Gettier facts are defeaters. They're something that would another bit of information expressed in a sentence that would undermine one of our poor justifications for our true beliefs. As Crumley says, a defeater provides some reason for thinking that one or more of the justifying beliefs or assumptions is mistaken. To go back to the broken clock example, the defeater would be something like the clock is broken, right? If I knew that the clock is broken, I might change my beliefs. I might not believe that it's 5 p.m., or I might believe that I should go and check another clock that's not broken in order to tell the time. So this leads us to what we call the indefeasibility view of knowledge. We just alter the traditional analysis a little bit, and we say that a true belief counts as knowledge if and only if it is indefeasibly justified. That means that there are no true propositions that would defeat the justification for your belief. There are no true propositions that would undermine that justification. So can you think of any defeaters in the Gettier cases we looked at earlier? I guess we've kind of already covered them, but if somebody wants to go ahead in the chat and yeah, the belief that like if we knew it was Havitt who had the Ford and not Nogot, then that would be a defeater. Yeah, if I knew the clock was broken. If the clock was working properly, then there's no defeater to undermine my justification and what time it is. Yeah, very good. This is another way of saying that knowledge should be extendable, which means to say that new information shouldn't weaken the justification for your belief. Now, that is if your belief is true and indefeasibly justified. Now, some people would read this the wrong way, like new information shouldn't weaken the justification. That does not mean that you should be resistant to new facts, right? That's the mistake that conspiracy theorists make. Like, say, for example, I'm sorry to pick on the flat earthers, but actually, I'm not sorry because the flat earth theory is incredibly silly. But imagine we have our subject S who believes that the earth is flat. Um, New information should undermine that false belief because the belief is false. So maybe we take them up in a rocket and let them look at with their own eyes at the curvature of the earth, right? Um, that would defeat the evidence for flat earth, the evidence from the flat earth society discussion forums or something. I don't know where people get flat earth information from. It's really silly. But if your beliefs are actually true and they're indefeasibly justified, then new information won't undermine them because it's true. The belief is true, right? I saw a really funny thing on the internet. It was It was an advertisement for like some kind of flat Earth Facebook group, and no word of a lie. It said something like, "Meet flat earthers from around the globe," and I was like, Do you hear yourselves? Like, oh my goodness, and Edmonton. Oh, that's oh geez, I didn't know that. But yeah, I mean, it's easy to pick on the flat earthers, okay? But there are other conspiracies that are conspiracy theories are dangerous because of the misinformation that they spread. Yes, birds aren't real. Birds aren't real is satire. So birds aren't real is making fun of conspiracy theorists. Like the people behind birds aren't real don't actually believe that birds are all government drones. It's satire, right? It's making fun of flat earthers and anti-vaxxers and stuff. And look, you might think, yeah, and the guy has a TED talk now too. So birds aren't real. Birds aren't real is actually pretty funny, and you should check it out. It's really good satire. Um, but there are yeah, no, it's not legit. It's meant to be a joke. Yeah. But there are conspiracy theories that are harmful. Yeah. Like what's the one that's harmful? Arguably, well, misinformation surrounding vaccines, I think we can all agree, has the potential to be very harmful. And a lot of these are centered around, a lot of that is centered around some kind of conspiracy. Um, but always remember, conspiracy theories are like backwards scientists. Yeah, like exactly. Like that's going to hurt someone. Forget about the fact that it's wrong. It's just factually wrong, but like you're gonna kill someone, right? Like that's messed up. That's child abuse. Like, oh, I'm going to give my child who's on the spectrum some bleach pills. What? Like, give your head a shake. Um, so always remember if you have somebody making claims about a conspiracy theory, it's like backward science. A scientist looks at the evidence and does some kind of experiment or some reasoning and arrives at a conclusion. A conspiracy theorist starts with a conclusion, looks for evidence that supports it, much of which is going to be bad evidence, and discards other evidence against the conclusion. That's the difference. That's why conspiracy theories are epistemically problematic. Speaking of that, by the way, that gets us to this idea of misleading defeaters. There can be misleading defeaters, which I think conspiracy theorists probably trade on quite a bit. A defeater could undermine a justification because you don't know the whole story, right? The controversy surrounding Andrew Wakefield and his claims about the MMR vaccine, so measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. Let's call this claim C. The MMR vaccine is safe and effective. Now, in 1998, he published a study that claimed that the MMR vaccine causes autism. This is where this entire thing comes from. The whole connection between vaccination and autism comes from Andrew Wakefield's study. So, if this claim is true, it would undermine C, that vaccines are safe and effective, namely the MMR vaccine. By 2010, it had become widely known that Wakefield had faked the data that he used in this study. And as a result, the Lancet, the journal, that the medical journal, is a very prestigious medical journal, um, retracted the study. And Wakefield actually lost his medical license as a result of this. Um, Question. With some veganism, cats and dogs, I don't know if it's a conspiracy, but it's certainly false belief. that cats. I mean, cats. Forget cats. Cats cannot be vegans. They'll die. Cats are hyper carnivores. They have to eat meat. Dogs are actually omnivores, but they do better. Um, they do better if they have some meat in their diet, right? I feel bad if you're trying to make your carnivorous or omnivorous pet be vegan. That's animal abuse. I don't think that that's right. If if you're going to try to make your cat vegan, the best thing is that you just don't have a cat, right? If you want to be vegan, like fully vegan, so that you're not buying cat food that's made out of meat, don't have a cat. That's the only ethical way. But uh, maybe a claim like veganism cures cancer, it could be tied to some conspiracy theories about medicine or big pharma, perhaps, right? Maybe. I mean, I'm not saying that being a vegan might not be good for your health, because eating too much red meat can be bad for you. Um, if you eat too much red meat, like too much beef, you can get like what is it, like high cholesterol or something, right? So and the ethical arguments are pretty sound. Yeah, too much meat. Yeah, maybe you'll get gout. You don't want gout. Gout is like an old timey disease that wealthy people used to get because they ate so much rich food. They'd get uric acid crystals building up in the joints, right? Yeah, parasites and worms. Well, how do the animals get the parasites? The eggs are out there in the poop on the grass, right? So I don't know. I have nothing against vegans as long as they're reasonable. I myself am a flexitarian, so I sometimes I eat a vegetarian meal for dinner. Sometimes I eat a double cheeseburger. I mix it up. But I try as best I can, and this is difficult to eat the meat of creatures that have not been treated horribly. I think that's important. But you're right, Braden. Too much of anything can be bad. It's like everything in moderation, including moderation, right? So, so it was widely known by 2010 that Wakefield was a fraud. Um, but if in 1999, before it came out that Wakefield had faked the data, this paper's claim would have been a misleading defeater of C. It could have defeated your belief that the MMR vaccine is safe and effective, even though C is true. It's true that the MMR vaccine is safe and effective. And this is the start of the modern anti vaccination movement, by the way. So there's a lot of people out there that to this day um, were convinced by this misleading defeater to doubt the claim that the MMR vaccine is safe and effective. And you saw what happened during COVID. Anti vaccination has never been bigger. Um, and that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing. I mean, people have been weird about vaccines since they were invented. There are old newspaper cartoons that vaccine. The first vaccine was developed by using cowpox to inoculate people against smallpox. Um, and the early anti-vaxxers were like, "Oh no, it's going to turn us all into cows and stuff." So this has been around for a while, but the modern vaccine anti-vax movement is probably due to Wakefield. Um, Sabin, is that how you pronounce your name? Go ahead. I hope I got your name right.
Yeah, you got it good. So
Awesome.
the modern stuff, some of it I understand, mostly because the most recent vaccines for COVID, the ones that were being pushed, like Pfizer and Moderna, they are a different style of vaccines than in the past. They are mRNA as opposed to the traditional ones. So the traditional ones, Johnson and Johnson, that was one of the traditional ones, is a culture of it would have been a culture of COVID that had been killed off or procedurally generated. And
Yeah.
then it's basically just giving you some of the dead viruses so that your body can analyze it. Whereas the mRNA actually changed your genetic code.
No, that
to
is not true.
that is not true. Okay, because this is that then I've been a little bit misinformed,
Yeah.
probably.
So what actually happens? So mRNA, it's the messenger RNA, and so it doesn't change your DNA. What it does is it works as a little chemical messenger to tell your body to start doing something. So in this case, what the messenger RNA in the in like the Pfizer vaccine does is it tells your cells make these spike proteins, the same spike proteins that the COVID virus uses to get into your cells. So your body makes some spike proteins, and then your immune system learns to recognize those proteins and to create antibodies against them. Um, so it's a different way of getting immunity. And then after a while, because we have messenger RNA in our bodies, that's how our cells that's how our cells kind of communicate and send messages to get our to make proteins to do this to do that. Um, so it's created and destroyed in the body all the time. But the claim that it changes us genetically is not true. It's a sort of molecular messenger within our biochemistry, but it does not actually change our biology. And after a while, the mRNA is destroyed, but the immune system has memory cells for the spike proteins such that if you get infected with COVID again, you are prepared to fight it. So that's an important thing, right? But that could be a misleading defeater as well. Like if you believe that it might change your DNA and you think fundamentally like, oh my God, that would mean that it's changing something like fundamentally important about me, that would certainly be a misleading defeater um, against the claim that like COVID vaccines are safe and effective. But yeah, that is a thing that unfortunately is repeated a lot. But it's not true that it changes you genetically. So
Thank you for clearing that up for me.
yeah,
It was a
no
bit of
problem.
misinformation I'd had from previous research, but thank you for
Yeah,
that.
no problem. I mean, like this stuff is complicated, right? And people are not. I mean, most people are not medical experts. You know, most people aren't biochemists. And I think that certain bad actors use worries like that. I mean, because think about it, if you hear a vaccine is going to alter your DNA, you're going to have an emotional response. You're going to be like, "Oh, geez, I don't want that." And that emotional response is powerful, but it's not necessarily the case that that's the effect that the vaccine is going to have, right? Um, yeah, Jose, that could be true too. I mean, uh, well, I see this a lot with QAnon, right? The QAnon conspiracy theory that they're going to save the kids from the Hollywood elites who want to drink their blood for some reason. I mean, like it's just so wacky, but these people do think that they're being persecuted by a big evil power for trying to save the children or something, right? Yeah, Mayar, that's correct. There are even conspiracies about masks. um yeah. Yeah, I mean, Casey, you're right. And again, like I think that's what I was getting at earlier is that, most people are not experts on this. I mean, heck, I'm not an expert on vaccines. I've just tried to listen to the reliable testimony of people who are experts, right? Um, and it's not like all medicine has always been safe all the time, right? I mean, like think about thalidomide. There's a left-handed and right-handed thalidomide molecules. Um, if you give one, it works perfectly safely as an antidote to morning sickness. But if you give uh, the wrong what's it called, isomer or whatever, if you give the wrong one, your baby's going to have birth defects. And when thalidomide was uh, released, we didn't know that the difference between the two different versions was so important. That's why we put so much time and effort into medical research. Yeah. Or yeah, lead. Yeah, lead. I mean, used to be lead in all kinds of things. Even in the early 2000s, I bought this really cool coffee mug that had it was made of glass and it had a caffeine molecule painted on the front. I was so excited to get it and drink coffee out of it. And I looked at the bottom and it said, "This product contains lead." I was like, "Are you serious? I can't drink out of this coffee mug. Like I'm gonna get lead poisoning or something." It's crazy. Or cigarettes. Like I have my vape here. I vape now for harm reduction, but I used to smoke. And back in my parents' and grandparents' day, you would see advertisements for cigarettes, like, 4 out of 5 doctors smoke Camels. It's crazy. I just have to plug my laptop in here. My battery is running low. So, that's the spiel about undefeated defeaters. Yeah, it does. Nicotine addiction, not good. All right, how are we doing for time? I think I probably killed some time there with my rant about vaccines. Another way that we can answer Gettier or revise the traditional analysis in the face of Gettier cases is to just say that we can't allow false beliefs to be part of our justification. So, um, in Gettier cases, people are relying on false beliefs. Like in the barn case, the example that these are all barns, when in fact some of them are barn facades. Or in the Nogot Ford case, believing that Miss Nogot owns a Ford when in fact it's Miss Havett that owns a Ford, right? So maybe we just disallow false beliefs. Oh, I try to be informative. I like to get outside of the textbook, if I can, because the textbook is great. I'm not knocking it. I love this textbook, but um, we have to use what we're learning. We have to exercise these mental muscles, as it were. So if we can expand on the discussion, I'm always happy to do that. And feel free to jump in at any time if any of you want to expand on something or inform one another of something important. Go ahead. I love that participation. Yeah. Good, good. So now we get to reliabilism. Reliabilism arose in the 70s, and Alvin Goldman is probably one of the more prominent advocates of it. And here, what matters is that the connection to the truth between the truth and the connection between your truth, the truth and your beliefs, um, is what matters when it comes to justification. Now, on reliabilism, a belief is justified if there's a reliable connection between the belief and the truth. Now, you might say, geez, that sounds a little vague. What does it mean to have a reliable connection between a belief and the way the world is? And, there are a few options we have here. Goldman emphasized reliable belief forming processes. So these would be things that we would characterize as psychological or cognitive processes. So maybe you're a scientist or a journalist, and you have certain methods that you rely on in forming new beliefs. Or better yet, well, not better, but maybe you're a philosopher and you know a lot about logic and the rules of inference, and so you follow those methods when you form beliefs, and you try to be aware of the cognitive biases that you have. Try not to let those biases influence your thinking. Those would be reliable belief forming processes for somebody like Alvin Goldman. um, David Armstrong focuses on reliable connections between beliefs and the environment. So again, the world, the immediate part of the world that you're in. Philosophers use terms like the world and the environment. We don't mean the planet Earth when we say the world. We mean everything. as Wittgenstein said, the world is everything that is the case. And when we say the environment, we don't like mean nature specifically. We mean where you are in the world. So right now, my environment is this office, right? And so for Armstrong, we need reliable connections between our beliefs and the way our immediate environment is. So, a reliable connection might be like, okay, I can look out the window, my window is clear, and I can plainly see what the weather is like. There's no there's nothing interfering with my sense organs. For example, I'm wearing my glasses, the window is clean, the room is well lit. um, so I have a reliable connection between the belief that I have formed and the environment. Compare that with going into an old broken down Victorian house, and it's dark and it's drafty and you can't see anything and you hear noises. You might come to believe that there's a ghost following you, but there's probably not any ghosts. It's just that you're in this environment that's dark. Or forget ghosts. Maybe you, in the darkness, you think you see a skeleton or something, and you turn the lights on, and it's just an old coat rack or something, and you're like, whoo, and you breathe a sigh of relief. Those are the kinds of things that Armstrong has in mind. So, but the key point is that on reliabilism, our justified beliefs have to come about in a way such that they're likely to be true. So, more formally, we could schematize this as firstly, to have knowledge on reliabilism, the belief has to be the result of a reliable belief forming process. Secondly, there shouldn't be any defeaters. That is, no alternatives that could lead you to have a false belief, or misleading defeaters, I should say. Um, and your belief, of course, has to be true. And if you have that, then according to a reliabilist, you've got knowledge. Um, Now, there are some criticisms of reliabilism, to be sure. One is from Lawrence Bonjour, and he argues against reliabilism on the basis that it counts cases of irrational belief as justified. And Bonjour does not think that cases of irrational belief should count as knowledge. And to illustrate this, he uses this really funny example of Norman the reliable clairvoyant. So Norman is a clairvoyant. He can see the future. He has psychic powers, as it were. Um, but he doesn't have any reason to believe that he's a clairvoyant or a reliable one. And even if you asked him how he knows things, he wouldn't be able to tell you. He'd just be like, I have a feeling, or the spirits told me, or something like that, right? Now, he comes to believe that the president is in New York City. And it's true that at the time Norman forms that belief, the president is in New York City. According to a reliabilist, his belief is reliably justified because he's a reliable clairvoyant. He has a reliable belief forming process, but it's justified by his hunch, not a good reason. So on reliabilism, we should say that Norman is justified because he's a reliable clairvoyant. And then Bonjour asks, why is not the mere fact that there is no way, as far as he knows or believes, for him to have obtained this information, a sufficient reason for classifying this belief as an unfounded hunch and ceasing to accept it? And if Norman does not do this, is he not thereby being epistemically irrational and irresponsible? So Norman should actually reject his beliefs, even though he's right. Um, and this is kind of a muddy example. I don't know what you think about this, but I'm a skeptic myself when it comes to these sorts of things. And indeed, there is not really any evidence that clairvoyance works. But so this is an imaginary exercise. Just imagine if there were a clairvoyant who just has a feeling, um, and is always right, but can't justify it with reasons. Well, the reliabilist Bonjour says should count that as knowledge, but that doesn't make sense. Knowledge should be justified with reasons, not with hunches or feelings, right? Justification, Bonjour is saying, requires that we can give reasons for our belief. You know, if Norman is for real, he should be able to give us reasons, and we should be able to verify or falsify, you know, what he says. But reliabilism doesn't seem to require that. That's Bonjour's problem with it. Goldman, however, disagrees. He says reliabilism requires only an effect that beliefs in the external world be suitably caused. If one wishes, one can simply employ the term justification, that belief causation of this kind counts as justification. In this sense, of course, my theory does require justification, but it is entirely different from the sort of justification demanded by Cartesianism. Um, and by the way, Norman agrees, or Goldman agrees, that Norman, the reliable clairvoyant, doesn't know the president is in New York. He doesn't think that Norman's belief forming process is a reliable one. But the important takeaway is really just what a reliabilist means by justification compared to what maybe someone else means. Goldman means that if your belief is reliably caused, it's justified. While Bonjour says if you have good reasons for your belief is justified. So reliabilism, this is why Goldman doesn't agree. Reliabilism says that a reliably produced belief is justified unless there's some other reliable process that could undermine it. In the case of Norman, it's that he's relying on a hunch when he could rely on some other reliable process, like turning on the news and seeing that the president is in New York. That's why Goldman disagrees, that Norman knows. So next time we're going to turn to chapter 3, and we're going to look at some of this in more detail by examining theories of justification. And it looks like we have 10 or so minutes left. So, does anyone have any questions, or perhaps whether you have questions about yeah, no problem. If we have questions about the material, or tests and essays and stuff, I'll stick around for those who have questions. Yeah, the essay. Well, keep in mind, I'm going to have an entire lecture dedicated to the essay, and how to write it. So I'm not going to say too much about that today, other than that your task will be to defend an argument. You'll have to make an original argument. And I'm going to provide you with instructions on how you should do that. And I'm also going to provide you all with a list of topics. Of course, you can come up with your own topic if you want to, but if you decide to do that, you should run it by me first. So that's what I recommend. Well, let us know review. Yeah, I'll probably let you know the kinds of things that will be on the test. I can tell you what weeks will be on the test. So the week the test is happening, that test will cover everything from the week before that to the beginning of class. Yeah, you'll want to know names of thinkers and what they believed or argued. Dates are not really that important. You don't need to know when Plato was born and died. In fact, we don't really know ourselves. But you will have to know that Descartes was a rationalist. You'll have to know that Hume is an empiricist, that Kant is a transcendental idealist. You'll have to be able to explain what those three things are, right? Yeah, it's mostly slides and lectures, but there might be something from the text in there, like that I haven't mentioned. That's to make sure that everybody's reading. Yeah, memory could be a basis for knowledge, definitely. Um, but memory can be unreliable, but I would say that generally speaking, it's generally reliable, right? Um, Well, you could review using only my lectures and the PowerPoint slides, but you should make sure that you have read the chapters, because you never know. Something could appear on the test from a chapter that I haven't explicitly covered here. The test format is going to be online, and it's going to have multiple choice and true false questions, and then some short answer stuff. You'll basically be able to start it anytime you want throughout the week, but once you begin, there'll be a time limit. I'm going to give you as much time to write the test as we have in lecture. You can absolutely consult your materials as you're writing the test. It's like open book. But I do recommend studying beforehand because of that time limit. You could easily run out of time. Yep. Yep. You should know the names of some of the writings. But the ideas, the names and the ideas are more important, not what books they appear in. Yeah, the first quiz is going to be, I think it's the week before reading week. I have to double check. Um, I think, yeah, you can review questions before you submit. Absolutely. I'm going to build the quiz so that you can like after you've filled out all the multiple choice and everything, you can review and decide and then submit when you're absolutely sure. And then the short answer ones, they're going to be like a couple paragraphs, and you're going to write those out and submit and click submit when you're happy with those. Okay, infallibility. Infallibility just means it's impossible to be mistaken. It's impossible to be incorrect. That's all that means. Yeah, quiz, test, same thing. Yeah, we have two of them. Two quiz slash tests. It's the same thing. And then the final exam, which is like a take-home exam. And of course, you have a paper due on the last day of class, but it's a short paper. It's not that bad. It's not all multiple choice. No, as like some of this is covered in the course outline, remember? So if you're not sure, always go and check the course outline, but it's going to be a mix of multiple choice, true, false, and short answer. Yeah, that's what it'll be. I like to mix it up. Oh, and by the way, I have information to share with you soon about our teaching assistants. We have teaching assistants now. So they'll be marking a lot of your work. And I'm going to provide an updated course outline that has their contact information on it. And so if you have questions, say about comments on your short answers, you'll want to contact the TA who marked it, or me if I'm the one who marked it. All right. Do I have a favorite? No, I think they're all terrible. I think they're all terrible. I don't really have a favorite. Um, I guess that one of the ones that really got me into philosophy actually were 9/11 conspiracy theories. I used to be on online a lot, doing being like a skeptic of that, and that's kind of how I learned about that's I guess that was my first bit of epistemology and philosophy of science, was like learning about why conspiracy theories are epistemically dubious. And it just so happened that the first one that I turned my attention to was 9/11. Unfortunately, that particular conspiracy is wrapped up in a lot of other conspiracies. Um, uh, the whole New World Order conspiracy and so forth, right? If you find one conspiracy theory, you tend to find it situated within a web of other conspiracies, and it's like this whole other worldview, which is why it can be so hard to talk to people who are like really convinced. Yeah, yeah, like fringe political movements, a lot of anti-Semitism, right? And they take on a whole other worldview, and that's why it can be so hard to reach somebody who's convinced of all these conspiracies. And it's really sad, it's really sad. um So anyway, um, that's it for today. I guess I'll let you all go. Have a good rest of your week and a good weekend. And I'll see you next week, and we'll discuss theories of justification. So please read chapter 3 in Crumley for that. Thank you, everyone.